Hello everybody, this is Michael with MKTV. I'm the owner of MKTactical in Hillsboro, Oregon. Today we're going to talk about SB941 and how SB941, the new background check bill, will or can affect you in your life and in your transfers and in your dealing with firearms. To my left I have two gentlemen that are very familiar with the bill. Here far left is Kevin Starrett from the Oregon Firearms Federation, and Jason Short from Short Law Group. And Kevin, if you could introduce yourself real quick and tell us real quick about your background.
Yeah, I'm the director of the Oregon Firearms Federation, which is a gun rights lobbying organization here in Oregon that incorporated in 1998, and have been pretty successful in fighting gun legislation, and actually until Senate Bill 941 came along. Senate Bill 941 is a very political bill which has really no law enforcement purpose whatsoever. Even the sponsors of the bill admitted that, as a bill that passed with only Democratic support. Not a single Republican voted for it. And a bill that was quite clearly designed to harass law-abiding gun owners and have zero effect on criminals at all. So that's the history of that bill, and it's confusing, it's a problem, and it has a lot of unanswered questions.
Well, that's why we're here today, to answer some of those questions, or hopefully be able to answer some of those questions. Jason, how about you?
Yeah, so my name is Jason Short. I own Short Law Group. It's a small, what we describe as a criminal boutique law firm. We specialize, a lot of our cases are in self-defense involving mostly firearm cases, also other weapons as well. We handle everything from murder, homicide cases, self-defense cases, but we have a specialty in representing individuals that have used firearms in the commission of protecting themselves, but oftentimes it's misunderstood where the DA's office will interpret that as using a firearm during the commission of a crime. So we have a different outlook on some of those cases. We also petition under the statute here in Oregon to restore gun rights. We do a lot of those cases as well for individuals who had prior felonies. So anyway, we're heavily involved in cases involving firearms here in the state of Oregon.
Excellent, excellent. So what we will do is we will post your company's website under the video, so people, if they want to get a hold of you, they can contact you there. And same, of course, for Oregon Firearms Federation. I mean, obviously, everybody that owns firearms in the state of Oregon should be a member of Oregon Firearms Federation. So I think, Kevin, would you like to say a little bit more about the history, how SB 941 came to fruition?
Sure. 941 is almost entirely the product of a lot of money that flowed into Oregon from Michael Bloomberg, the former mayor of New York, who is on basically a jihad against gun owners nationwide and wound up kind of buying the elections this last election cycle. There have been two previous attempts to pass a universal gun owner registration bill, both of which we were able to defeat. This year, because of the makeup of the legislature, the bill passed. It was entirely a political product. It was not a product that in any way served a purpose. The people who proposed it could never, and we had sheriffs come and testify and say this is a bad idea. 23 counties opposed the bill. I think that's unprecedented. We've already had, I believe, 3 or 4 counties that have said they won't enforce it. A dozen or so sheriffs who said they absolutely won't enforce it. That what its intention is to entrap people who are doing something that they've done honorably for generations, and no criminal purpose is served by it at all. In fact, it's going to be almost impossible to enforce unless there is some kind of sting operation or something like that. If you do look at the Oregon State Police numbers, though, they send a trooper out every time a firearms purchase is denied They send a trooper out to do a quote investigation, and if you look at the numbers, there's virtually never an arrest of a person who's been denied, even when they identify them as felons or wanted people. So clearly this is not an effort to get bad people to stop buying guns, because those people are turned loose. What it is an effort to make it extremely difficult to say, lend a firearm to someone who is in fear of their life, or do something as innocuous as bring guns to a firearm safety class to lend to an instructor who doesn't have enough for the people in his class. So what possible positive purpose that serves is, of course, there's none at all. But for the last couple of years, we've been able to defeat every effort at gun owner registration. And frankly, this year, because of the makeup of the legislature, the hard left was in charge, and they really behaved like hyenas at a kill. And it wasn't just with guns that they did this. There was absolutely no discussion about other ways to address this issue. They had the numbers and they were going to ram it through. So we wound up with 100% Democrats voting for it, with the exception of Betsy Johnson in the Senate and 3 House reps, Brad Witt, Jeff Barker, and Katie McCallum. And then we had Brian Clem, who claimed to be pro-gun. He got beat up by Tina Kotek, the Speaker of the House, and crawled away and voted for it, came back and tried to make some changes, and the changes were a joke. And he was promised things by Democratic leadership, and of course, they broke every promise. And so I think Brian learned a little bit about making deals with the Democrats in the legislature.
Yeah, now we're stuck with it, and that's the problem. And, obviously, being almost every day in the gun store, we get a lot of customers' questions, and we also get comments where customers come to the store and say, well, I heard this sheriff has said really he's not going to enforce it, and as much as I personally appreciate those efforts, it is not really sufficient to keep you safe.
Sure, because the law is still there.
The law is still there. I mean, you're still, if you don't follow the law, you're still violating it, and just because one sheriff doesn't enforce it, the next one might, and I think looking at the ones that have said they don't want to enforce it, it's mostly the ones in the big cities that have not said that.
Yeah,
so,
and I think one of the things we probably should do, and we really haven't, is to just say, basically, what does the bill do?
Yes.
And what the bill does is it basically eliminates your right to transfer, give, lend, sell a firearm to another person without police permission and a background check that must be conducted at a gun store.
Right.
There are exceptions built into the legislation for some family members. But in spite of the fact that even now we have a system where a person can conduct a background check voluntarily by just picking up the phone, that option is going to be eliminated. Now, a person who wants to in any way have a firearm change hands will have to go to a gun store, where the gun store will have to conduct the background check. The complications involved can be enormous, and the costs are completely unlimited. If a gun dealer even chooses to do a transfer, and the ones I've spoken to really aren't interested because it's more trouble than it's worth for them, then you're just out of luck. And so there's all kinds of issues coming up, like what happens when there's one of the many false delays or denials. Now the gun dealer, what does he do? Does he take that gun into his inventory? Does he warehouse it while he's waiting for an approval? If that person is ultimately denied because the state police made a mistake, now the original owner of the gun has to have a background check conducted on him, and the whole process can start all over again. And so it's a completely unworkable Rube Goldberg scheme that benefits absolutely nobody, and that doesn't benefit dealers because even if they want to charge a lot of money to do it, the hassles involved for them to conduct the transfers are probably going to be worth more, cost more than whatever they can make.
Well, and a good point too, Kevin, not just the cost itself, let's say it's 10, 20, 30 bucks or whatever the gun dealer decides to charge for something like that. But imagine the time and expense associated with, I want to sell something to my best friend, who I know is not a convicted felon.
Or give someone.
Or just give it. Or just give it to my best friend. Say, hey, there's a 1911, it's a really nice gun. Here you go. It's your 40th birthday. This is my gift to you. Well, now I've got to go find a dealer. Then I've got to drive around. I've got to then find a dealer that's willing to do that. Take time out of my schedule. I mean, just that alone.
And we all live in places
and what's the cost is going to be?
Well, and the costs I've heard start at $100 per gun for the dealers I've spoken to. And we live in a place where we have numerous gun dealers available to us. What happens if you get out to Central or Eastern Oregon, where there might not be a gun dealer for 300 miles? And then you have to go there, you have to be there for the transfer. If there's a delay or a denial or something like that, now you either have to come back or you have to give up the whole transaction. It's an absolute nightmare.
Oh, and the office hours, you gotta, most gun dealerships are gonna be 8, 9 o'clock in the morning.
Sure.
5 or 6 o'clock at night. I don't know, I mean, I'm working 60 hours a week. I gotta take time off work, so does my best friend.
That's right.
I mean, it's unbelievable.
And it also, there's no workable way to provide a firearm for a person who is you have a woman who's facing a stalker or some other assailant. She lives alone in a rural place. The only way you can let her have a firearm is if you can somehow prove that her life is in jeopardy, and then the minute her life is no longer in jeopardy, that gun has to be returned. There's no plausible way to do that. And so something that, and it's not even a matter of giving or selling. It's a matter of saying, Jason, you're going hunting this weekend. You want to take this rifle. You can't do that. That's illegal under this legislation.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, well, it really sounds like it's not a good piece, and so let's dive in some of the questions. I sent out an email to my customers about a week ago, and we got quite a few responses, and there were some very, very specific questions here, and I would like to address them. So Stephen, for example, asked, he's unclear about loaning a weapon. What does loaning a weapon actually mean from a legal standpoint? What is loaning a weapon? Is loaning a weapon if you and I go to the range and I hand you the pistol or the rifle and say, hey, you have fun for 30 minutes or whatever? Is that loaning, or is it loaning when I give you the rifle for a week or a month, or is it not loaning when we're in the same room, and it is loaning when you leave the room, or what's
Well, the term isn't addressed, but basically what the legislation says is that if I hand a gun, you have a customer come into your store.
Right.
He can handle a gun in your store.
Okay, that's not loaning.
That's not loaning.
Okay.
If I'm at the range with you or Jason, I can hand them whatever firearm. We can hand guns back and forth to each other. The problem is I can't leave. I can't leave and say I'm leaving this gun with you, because now that's become a transfer. And the problem is, and maybe Jason could talk a little bit about this, there's a lot of terms in this bill that aren't defined.
Yeah.
And so we're really in this situation now where we may not know all the ramifications of this bill until people start going to court.
Yeah. So let me play devil's advocate here. I'm at the range with a friend of mine. He's using my firearm. I gotta use the bathroom. I run out of the porta potty. I'm not at the range anymore at this point. Yeah. Potentially that could cause a problem.
Yeah, I mean, potentially, you hope that common sense doesn't fly out the window.
You would think so.
And so if there's a situation like that involves, and now you're in front of a judge.
Right.
And you say, hey, judge, look, I get that the police officer believes that he had probable cause to arrest me or something like that, or I'm in violation of this. But here's the thing. This is the situation. I didn't leave the property. I was on the property. I had to use the restroom. So the argument, I think we can make a good, solid argument that was not a transfer, it wasn't a loan, versus you went to your friend's house to go shoot, and then you left your gun behind.
Right.
And so you just left it, and you forgot. I left my handgun behind.
Yeah.
Again, that's going to come down to the specific, facts and the circumstances that you're going to have to articulate and say, I forgot. I absolutely forgot the gun. It wasn't a loan.
Yeah, I think you probably wouldn't be in trouble, say, going to use a bathroom at a range. But what if you were with friends and you were shooting, and you decided to go with your wife to go get lunch?
Right.
Now you've left. Is that a transfer? Well, that's unclear. But what happens if, for whatever reason, you can't get back? Your car breaks down, something comes
car
up.
accident.
Anything. Now your friend has to safeguard that gun. They're in possession of it. How are the courts going to treat that? And the fact is, I don't think any of us know.
We don't know.
Now let me ask you this, guys. So we have two people involved in this transaction here. Should it come to an issue, who is actually at fault here? Is it the person that owns the gun and loaned the gun, or is it the person that received the gun, or are they both in trouble? What's the situation on that? What do we know about that?
Well, I mean, it could come down to both.
Okay.
It really could come. It's going to be one of those situations where, if police do get involved, or sheriff's office, or sheriff's deputy, I should say, gets involved, it's going to be one of those subjective type of situations where, I guess, probably similar to when they respond to a domestic violence call, and both people are bloodied up and injured, and then they're going to have to interview, they're going to have to ask questions. My guess is they won't make a decision right away. They'll interview each individual, get the circumstances as to behind each one, and try to determine who's more culpable than the other.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's just, again, it's a logistical nightmare.
Right.
It's wasting resources for a sheriff's deputy or for a police officer who should be out somewhere else investigating a real crime. And again, we're tying up their resources, just like we are with the Oregon State Police, on responding to every single rejection on a gun purchase. It's a colossal waste of time, it's a waste of money, and I'm sure most of the sheriff's deputies and police officers, if they were frank and not worried about their job, would totally agree with that this is just a colossal waste of time.
Now, what happens if you've got a gun sitting in your gun safe that you've had there for a year that actually belongs to someone else? Which happens all the time, you know.
That is
Someone called me and said, well, I've got this rifle, I've had it for 6 years, it actually belongs to my uncle, but I've been hunting with it for 6 years. If I give it back, do I have to get a background check? It's actually his rifle. And the fact is, I believe you do. I believe you do.
Under the statute, I think you do.
It should reads like that. It should read like that. So Stephen had another question, which I found very interesting. Let's say if you're out of state, let's say you're going on a trip with a couple, 3 buddies, you want to go to a shooting match or training or something like that. How does that affect you when you are in another state? I mean, this is an Oregon law. So my thinking would be, as long as I'm not in Oregon, I can do whatever that state requires me to do. But what's your thought? What's your thought on that?
No, it's just like any other thing. I mean, you've got, every state has its own laws, and so if you're on vacation and you're in another state, Oregon has no jurisdiction over you.
Okay.
So Oregon law is only to the borders of Oregon, and so that's where it's enforceable.
Okay.
And so,
that answers
if you're
that
on
question.
vacation,
So
or let's say you're hunting in
fine.
Montana,
Yep.
or whatever else. So that's,
But you know, there's some other questions to dealing with out of state. For example, if any firearm is transferred from another state, from one state to another, you sell a gun to somebody who lives in another state, or give a gun, or whatever. Because it's an interstate transfer, the background check is required already. So but there's an exception to that, and that exception is if you receive the gun as part of a bequest. So if somebody wills a gun to you, the background check is not required by federal law. What if somebody wills a gun to you and he lives in another state? Now, in that case, I don't know, I assume the background check would be required because the gun was being transferred, but it's not being transferred by an Oregonian, say it's being transferred by someone in Colorado.
I think the legal advice, I guess the sound legal advice is if the person's receiving that from an individual outside of the state of Oregon, but they live in the state of Oregon, my advice would be that would apply because they live here in Oregon. That they're getting the firearm regardless of whether it's coming from next door, across the street, from another city in Oregon, or if it's coming from Vancouver or California. Once it comes in, I think regardless of whether it's required under federal law, now, because we have this new law under Oregon, I think it applies. I think that's my advice would be to do that.
I had one gentleman, was in email contact with one gentleman, his name is Larry, and he heard me talking on one of the radio shows that I was on in the last few months about my concern. What about if customer comes in a store, in a gun store, and wants to handle a gun? And at that point, I had a real concern about that would be an issue under this law, so that we essentially would have to run a background check on that person just so they can actually touch a gun in a gun store. Now that has not panned out really. I think I was wrong on that one, so Larry, you relax on that one, we're going to be okay. You can still come to MKTactical and look at our guns without, we have to do a background check, at least as far as we understand it at this point. Okay?
Absolutely. I'm very confident on that. I don't have any concern.
There shouldn't be any issues there. Yeah, and if there's a problem, I'll call you.
Call me.
Okay, all right.
I'd love to litigate that.
Yeah, actually, I think there's some language in the law that actually exempts federally licensed dealers from much of this.
Right.
So as a dealer, you still have to do the background check that's required to.
And if they transfer the guns, we sell the gun, obviously. Yeah. Okay. We had one question from Brett here that is a little bit more specialized. He has an 03 FFL for Curio and Relics firearms, and he's asking here, if I want to buy a CNR eligible firearm, will I need to go to a gun store or a gun shop for the background check required by SB941?
We were talking about that, and I'll let Kevin address that, but I think it applies.
I think it does too, because this bill is discussing the transfer of firearms. And in the Oregon statute, there is a definition for an antique firearm, but there's also a definition simply for a firearm. And firearm is a weapon by whatever name known, which is designed to expel a projectile by the use of powder. Well, that's a curio and relic. And so I don't really see any way out from under it. It's never addressed specifically in the bill, because quite frankly, the people who wrote this bill don't have any idea about anything, about guns, about gun laws. As a matter of fact, I was sitting in a hearing with one of the biggest anti-gunners the state has, Jenny Burdick, who was worried about states that don't conduct background checks. And I had to tell her, there is no state that doesn't conduct. Here's the one of the most anti-gun people in the state is not even aware that the Brady Bill is national law and that background checks are nationwide.
Yeah. That is
And then actually, if you
amazing.
look at the original incarnations of this in previous years, the way they had the bill set up, at one time you could give a gun to husbands or wives, brothers, sisters, children, but they neglected to include like nephews. So I could give a gun to my wife could give it to her sister could give it to her husband, and her husband could give it to his son, who is my nephew. But I couldn't give it to my nephew. So they added in nephews, but they didn't add in uncles. So you could give a gun to your nephew, but if he gave it back, that was a crime. So they tried to address all these little nuances here, and now the way they've written it now is if you have a domestic partner, which means if you're gay and you have a domestic partnership with someone, you can give that person a gun. But if you're a straight person who lives with a person of the opposite sex, that would be illegal. You cannot give a gun to somebody you've lived with for 10 years.
It's not quite what we call equality.
No.
Right. It is Scott who asked the question. He says here, it's my understanding that even to loan a private firearm to a friend, I must have the background check done, which is
That's exactly
that is correct.
That's correct.
Then it says, if true, is the process cost the same as the private sale?
It does.
And I would say absolutely. I mean, the gun stores that will participate, there would be no in the actual procedural in the actual how we proceed with this transaction. There's no difference.
The process is exactly
the process
the
is
same.
the same. Booking in, booking out, all these things
Yeah,
are
and
the
that's
same.
kind of funny that one of the changes that House Rep Brian Clem said he extracted from Tina Kotek before she smacked him around and pulled a bill out from under him was that he would have a situation where you could lend a gun to someone you knew for 7 days. You'd still have to do the background check, but you could do it yourself over the phone. And then there was no explanation for what happened after 7 days, what happened if he didn't give it back. The bill was so poorly drafted that the day he went on the floor to carry the bill, he finally read it. And he demanded that it be removed from the floor and sent back to committee because it made no sense. This is the problem. They don't read the stuff that they foist on us.
Now, I have a question from the perspective of a gun dealer, and obviously we have many gun dealers in the state of Oregon that encounter the same problem. Is there any advice that you guys are aware of for us gun dealers how we have to proceed with these transactions? Is it the same way as we would buy a gun from a private party, booking it in, stolen background checks, stolen gun background check, and then sell it to that person, or the other question is, do we have to book those guns in our bound book and book them out to the other person, or are we just essentially the office for these two people, and we're punching in the information in the system and then having a printout? Is there going to be from OSP a different type of background check or a different interface on the computer than what we have right now? How does it work?
You're required to take the gun into your inventory, enter it into your bound book, enter it in and enter it out. The only exception would be is if both parties were there and the transfer was immediately denied. Not delayed, but denied. So if I go in with Jason, he's trying to sell me, give me a gun, and I'm denied, he can leave with the gun. The ATF will allow him to leave with the gun.
If it was his gun.
If it was his gun,
from the beginning.
But if there's a delay, and so you're not getting an answer for 30 or 60 days, you have no choice but to take that gun, put it into your inventory, and enter it into your
What
bound
if the
book.
original owner wants to take it home? He can't?
He can take it home, actually, I don't know if it's delayed.
That's a really good question. I would think that you could probably take it home if it's delayed, and then you would contact
but here's
him
the problem. What if the original owner takes the firearm home, and then I get an approved? At that point, from a background check perspective, that gun should belong to the buyer, but the seller still has it in his possession.
Yeah, I believe that there's a delay that I don't think he can take it home unless the sale is canceled. Because you can't sell a gun that's not in your inventory.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's gotta be in your
Right.
inventory, and if you put it into your inventory, if you're waiting for the sale to be approved, you can cancel the sale, but you can't have him walk out of the store with the gun, because
Right.
now it belongs to you.
Right.
And what happens if the sale doesn't go through,
Yeah.
and when you try to return it to the original owner, if there's a problem, because once again, the state police make a mistake, and now they deny me as the original owner. Now, who owns the gun? Do you own it? As the dealer,
That's
it's
a
in your
very good question.
That's a very
inventory,
good.
and nobody knows.
It's an unknown. It's
Yeah.
an unknown.
It's just an unknown. Okay, right. So kind of to wrap this up, let's go through a few scenarios. If you have a firearm and you want to gift or sell the firearm to a family member, as long as the family member is one of those exceptions that we talked about: brother, sister, father.
Yeah, it's
Grandpa.
obvious. Grandparents, grandchildren, up to first cousins,
Okay.
and the spouses of those people.
Right.
Okay.
Now, here's where it's a really interesting kind of situation. I can't give a gun, if I lived with a woman who wasn't my wife,
Mhm.
and I've lived with her for 20 years, I cannot give her a gun. But let's say I had an uncle who just got out of prison, all right, spent a dime in the joint. He's homosexual, so he comes out and he gets a boyfriend.
Mhm.
And he and his boyfriend form a domestic partnership,
Mhm.
right? I can give a gun to the domestic partner of my felonious uncle, but I cannot give a gun to a woman I've lived with for 20 years.
Yeah, that's.
And then it gets even more
sense.
complicated, because
Yeah.
if they're in that domestic relation partnership, and the one felon, who's, the one partner, who is prohibited from possessing, then you get into the issue of actual versus constructive possession. So then you've got to worry about that other partner who's a felon, who can't have possession. Where's that gun being stored? Where he can have constructive possession, where the district attorney's office could say, nope, you're now felon in possession of a firearm, it's in your home, and you have constructive possession of that. So that,
yeah.
one more complicated.
Well,
Yes,
it's
and
complicated.
this is why we have lawyers.
It's just like- So then you could say, hey, don't bring that gun in, because then I'm now in constructive possession of that, even though you could lawfully sell it to the other non-felonious market.
So we're good. We're good on close relatives.
relatives.
Close relatives.
Who
We're
live
good.
in Oregon.
Who live in Oregon,
Right.
of course. Otherwise,
And who aren't
we go
prohibited
through FFL
persons.
dealers.
Right.
Yeah, as
Right.
understood. If I'm at the range and I'm a firearm instructor and I have a gun with me and one of my students' gun misfunctions and he wants to essentially shoot my gun, I can
You
hand
can,
him the
and
firearm.
that's firearms classes
Very
are
specific.
specifically addressed.
Specific address.
Let me
Okay,
just,
so
let me just read that real quick. It
Yeah.
says, one of the exceptions, a transfer does not include.
okay.
So it does not include, it goes into at a shooting range, shooting gallery, or other designated, or area designated for the purpose of target shooting, for the use during target practice, firearm safety or training, or a class, or similar lawful activity. Now that's a,
Well, and
It's
this
very
is where
broad.
we which could help us on one side, which could also cause a problem on the other side. Because when I'm sitting in my living room and you're coming over as a guest and I show you my gun collection, that everybody would think, well, that is definitely covered here.
Yeah, and unless
Yeah.
he leaves with the guns, I don't
Right.
think that's an issue.
Okay,
I think it's not an issue.
There are a lot of those things are not going to be a problem, but there's going to be plenty of problems with the bill when you actually want to just say things that we've all done our whole lives. You just said, hey, that's a nice rifle, Michael, can I try it? Yeah, go ahead, take it home. Something we would have always done, sure,
Right.
not a problem.
Sure.
I've had friends lend me guns to do gun classes with.
Yeah.
You know, and I will tell you at this point, as an activist organization, I'm going to give people the exact opposite advice that I think any good lawyer would give them. And the advice I'm going to give them is to ignore it and to not obey the law, because if we obey the law, now we become completely subject to, it's so hard to enforce. It's an insane, it's a destructive, it's a counterproductive law, and my hope is that all of the people will simply ignore it. And if you choose not to take that advice and something happens, please call Jason.
because I can't be in that position.
Exactly.
And I can't be in that position either, so I would advise you, follow
As much
the
as
law.
I would want to.
Follow the law. But, okay, so we're good in the shooting range, we're good in a private setting, you know, somebody looking at the firearm and so forth, we're good in a store, you know, I think that these are good things to know, and every time you sell a firearm to somebody, then unless it's one of those exceptions, then you just have to go and find a dealer that will do this. Okay. One more question came from Don, and this is probably not something we might not be able to answer. Were there any amendments to SB 941 since it was signed into law, or just before it? I mean, is it still the original?
The bill did change a little bit in the process, but since it was signed, it is exactly how it was signed. The one effort to pass another bill, which I believe was Senate Bill 315, was Brian Clem's atrocity, and that passed in the House, and with the promise that if a couple of Republicans jumped ship, that our Senate President Peter Courtney would hear at the Senate. So a couple of not very bright Senate House members jumped ship, changed their vote from no to yes, and Peter Courtney said, "Fooled you, I'm not hearing it." So no, nothing's changed.
Yeah, nothing has changed on that one. And then of course is kind of a question. It's more rhetorical question is. Since the background check has not been reliable in the past, as we know, even listening to the number that we get from OSB, and we see nationwide these background checks haven't been that successful because people that committed tremendous atrocities they pass background checks.
People who did nothing fail.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Right. So obviously it's not the magic tool that prevents the bad guy from getting a gun. You know, how is that going to help? Well, we kind of answered that already. I mean, there is really no much sense. And I remember when we were up in Salem for the first hearing, you know, we had the three anti-gun speakers there, and we had the mayor of Portland there, and we had the ex-police chief from Portland there, and you know, we had the gentleman that unfortunately his wife was killed in the Clackamas Town Center shooting. You know, I was just thinking. You know, now they're dealing with feelings, and I mean, who really can attack a person like that who went through a tremendous thing like that? But even his wife would still possibly be dead today because the shooter at that time stole the gun.
There hasn't been a single incident with these people have used as an example where any of these laws would have made a difference. The background check is a failure. We see this over and over. The Brady campaign is now pushing background checks as a result of the last few shootings that happened, all of which the background checks were passed. It's absolutely absurd. Yeah. You cannot reason with these people. You cannot bargain with them in good faith. They're not interested in common sense anything. They're interested in the complete elimination of our rights, and that is why I, you know, as an organization, Oregon Firearms takes a very, very militant stand about this, and we're committed to doing everything we can to overturning it.
I mean, it just goes into it with off. It's just you can't compromise. If you just compromise a little bit, then it's a slippery slope. So that's what's so great about off. It's just, I mean, it's in their motto or whatever it is. Just no compromise. No, you can't give an inch.
When you look at the Second Amendment, what it says, we're far away from that already. You know, I mean, you know, as an instructor for CCW and so forth, you know, I love to teach and so forth, but I always tell my students, I mean, on one side, I don't even understand why we even have to have that, because the Second Amendment says clearly the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So why we're infringing it, you know? But yeah, I think this was good. Is anything that you guys wanted to add on from your perspective before we close out?
Well, I would just say that, you know, Senate Bill 941 is a moving target. I mean, it's constantly changing. It's brand new. It doesn't even go into effect until August 8th, I think it is.
8th or 9th.
So, but once it does, and if somehow some case does come to light, I don't know how, but I'm sure it will. Mm-hmm. Something might be a sting operation or something. I wouldn't put it past some of the people down in Salem to try to do something to try to get somebody in trouble. Talk to Kevin, talk to me, give me a call, because we want to make sure that when we come out of the gate on one of these cases, we want to make sure it's done right. I don't want to set any bad legal precedent with some poor decisions or some poor representation. Like somebody is just not familiar with Senate Bill 941. Client comes in and says, "Geez, There's a lot of defense attorneys that have no interest in firearms. And if someone gets a court-appointed attorney or something who has no interest in guns at all,
Yeah.
may just give some bad advice and say, hey, just, do this or we do that. And so
Well, and I would
that's a
say,
concern I have.
we answer questions about this every day. I'm sure there are many that we haven't answered. People are free to contact us, and if there's a question that I can't answer, I'm gonna call Jason, get a legal opinion on it, and we do that every day, so we're
Right.
happy to do it.
And as you mentioned earlier, sometimes there's really situations where there is maybe no answer, and we just have to hope,
We just, yeah.
Thank you very much, guys, for helping us out to get the word out a little bit about SB 941 and what it means. And to finish this off, I would say, being an immigrant, guys, the question is, why do we really have to deal with this? Part of the reason is because many of us have decided that it is too difficult to go vote. Okay, it is too stressful to vote. How can that be? We have every time we have an election, we have decisions made by mostly not the majority of the people. And so what I would say is, next time around, get active, get the word out, and vote. Whatever you believe in, you got to stand up for it, and you need to make sure that the right people get voted in. Okay. Thanks very much. See you next time.
Take care.
Great, thank you.